Kia ora and welcome to this Taima ki te kōrero. Ko Pip Osborne tōku ingoa. I am a kaiaarahi with TENS and I'm here to support you with NCEA Level 1. I'm going to cover the frequently asked questions regarding the recently released externals for Level 1 technology standards. I'm going to cover the external structure. So for DVC, it's portfolio based, due the 30th of October. For 1.3, there's a maximum of 15 A3 pages or a 1-minute MP4. For 1.4, there's a maximum of 5 pages. It must be from one design outcome. There's a maximum of 3 files per standard. Each one of those files can be up to 500 megabytes and can either be PDF, JPEG or MP4. The digital 1.3 is an exam on the 25th of November in the morning slot. 1.4 is a task with prompts, 1200 words, 5 or more images that are JPEG or PNG. Note the 12-point Verdana font, and this must be a PDF also due on the 30th of October. MP3 1.3 and 1.4 are both tasks with prompts. This is also due on the 30th of October. 1200 words or an audio file, maximum of 4 minutes. This is a PDF or various audio and video files are also accepted. Things to note, try not to leave it until the 30th of October for students or yourself to submit the files. This is a Wednesday, so think about being strategic with your students. Candidates must complete their report in class during a period of assessment selected by the school. It should not work on it outside of this time. The recommended period of assessment is 4 hours. Structure this how you wish. 4 1-hour periods are quite common. There are schools who have set this assessment already with their students who have provided feedback that it is generally taking around 2 hours to complete the assessment for the majority of students. During this time, candidates are not to receive guidance, templates, scaffolding, additional instruction, or any form of additional assistance. This applies from the commencement of the assessment session until its completion. So let's talk about this tick list that you need to read out before the assessment. This is publicly available on the NZQA website. If you need to, print this out and have it on the walls, on the tables, and unpack it with your students prior to the assessment event. Then read it out prior to the assessment event. Some of this vocab may be tricky for your priority learners and may need to be unpacked. Who's going to supervise the external? The best practice for 1.3 and 1.4 MPT and Digital 1.4 tasks with prompts are that some teachers are swapping externals to supervise to ensure that they don't accidentally scaffold their students with any questions. Digital teachers, I'm sure you are well used to this, but do you have other subjects booking your computer lab where there is no BYOD policy? How are you going to manage this for your classes and students? Are you looking at a timetable for this? Assessment specs specify that students can only use their own work as source material. Google and AI seem quite obvious as a problem, but have you thought about your walls? Wall displays or glossaries? Have you got explanations of the brief, specification, or perhaps physical and material attributes on your walls, kaitiakitanga, stakeholder, etc.? You may want to scaffold the vocab now. Consider how you're going to manage the assessment over time and in your classroom. Some classrooms have monitoring computer software like AB Tutor. So for the DVC externals, there's our biggest frustration right there, is the impact on having to scan everything and use the photocopier. So best practice of working from a visual diary, regularly scan and photograph as students go. Tech drawings should be probably the same. So 1.3 is not the freehand external of the project. It's a spatial or product project that uses the great graphic practices for visual communication, but also it encompasses the consideration of people. It should connect to a place that the context is designed for, whether that product is for use underwater or a spatial solution in a place of cultural significance. Students need to keep the possible users of the outcome in mind throughout the design process to meet their needs or improve their lives. For 1.4, students need to include design drawings to show the intent of the drawings. Orthographic drawings should have a minimum of two views and one paraline. Make sure students, when they scan, if they're doing their drawings by hand, they scan as PDF so that they retain their scale. Ensure that students do not put these scanned images into a slideshow or PowerPoint, as this will affect the scale. For the digital externals, the 1.3, as mentioned, will be an exam on the 25th of November. There is some confusion with this standard in the assessment achievement standard. It says examples of usability principles could include Matapuna Māori, Nielsen's heuristics, and usability concepts. But if we look at the 1.4 specs, examples of usability principles will be drawn from those topics. So ensure you've covered them in your teaching and learning program. Digital 1.4. Schools, teachers and candidates are not permitted to share or discuss the assessment or their assessment responses with any other schools, teachers or candidates until after the final date for submission on the 30th of October. It's unusual that digital is the only text subject with specific information for candidates sitting this achievement standard in relation to that statement above. However, the assessment specs are publicly available as listed, and you can use this as your curation of evidence list for students. Check it carefully. For MPT 1.3, the instructions for externals explicitly states that students cannot provide a template or scaffolding during the assessment period. The task with prompt doesn't come with a template like it did in the pilot, and it's potentially thrown some of you. Hopefully your students are well versed with making a slideshow or PowerPoint or a Google Doc. One thing to note is there is no word count in Google Slides, so for some students they might find this stressful when considering the 1200 word requirement for the standard. Perhaps they could use Google Docs instead. Students can record their answers orally and develop their own template during the exam period. Students need to curate some evidence like visuals from their portfolio as listed in this slide. If your school is not allowing students to access the internet at all, they could download their work, this curated information, to the hard drive of their classroom computer or a USB. And as you can see, they need the brief with specs, the intended environment, some research, annotated design development like drawings and models, annotated final design, whether it's feasible or physical, stakeholder feedback, making sure it's 2 stakeholders or more, and kaitiakitanga. A physical outcome is not required to achieve in this assessment, but if created as part of the learning program can be used. Examples of ways students can fulfill their responsibility towards their environment could include the selection of materials, the economic use of materials, and the appropriate waste of materials. MPT External 1.4, as with 1.3, I just want to expand on the visual evidence. It is meant to support a candidate's response by providing visual context rather than by offering textual information. It should not overly influence or shape their response. The visual evidence should not contain text that could form all or part of their responses to the prompts provided. For this reason, any images of text that candidates are permitted to bring into the assessment should be primarily descriptive rather than analytical or reflective. For example, this is a biscuit joint rather than this is a biscuit joint that I use because my stakeholder, etc., etc. And remembering a physical outcome is not required to achieve in this assessment, but if created as part of the learning program, it can be used. And there's a very similar list there to 1.3. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions regarding anything to do with the NCEA, particularly these externals, please get in touch with us. kaiaarahi@tens.org.nz.